With 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 5. And here we read, in Gibeon, which I taught on last Wednesday, in Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. Now, Solomon had sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. And so this is the night after that great sacrifice. And the Lord comes to Solomon, and he asks Solomon, ask what I shall give thee. And you talk about an open door. God says, I will give you whatever it is that you desire. And of course, the request that Solomon gave was this: give therefore, verse 9, thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this so great a people? Now, the word judging there is not just passing judgment, but it literally is carrying that understanding that he would be making decisions that would weigh in his hands the life, the prosperity, the death, to go to war, not to go to war, the things that would all have to be done as a king. And so his longing and his desire was really, Lord, give me wisdom. Give me wisdom. And of course, the Lord answered his prayer. God blessed him immensely. We read that God said, I'll not only give you what you've requested, but because your desire was wisdom, understanding, and it wasn't riches and the power over your enemy, I will give you all of that as well. And so I think we are unable to really grasp just how wealthy and prosperous Solomon and Israel was throughout his reign until the bad end, which is this morning's message, so we won't go there. But I did want to pick up this verse here because this is instructive. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 28. With God blessing with the borders of Israel, the largest that it had ever been, it will never be this large again until the second coming of Jesus Christ. But the borders are as large as they are. The empire is truly respected by all. And we read here in 1 Kings 3:28, and all Israel heard of the judgment which the Lord had judged. And they feared, or literally revered, the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. There is a saying that says, an organization, a ministry, a government, a nation rises and falls on leadership. Agree? A bad leader and the consequences of a bad leader is going to be felt throughout an organization. A good leader, and there will be a prosperity, a joy. Put a bad leader in office, though, and things can go terribly wrong and quickly. And we're going to illustrate that a little bit this morning. Not trying to be political, but hey, I don't stay away from it, so let's dive into it. So, here's the point. At this time in Solomon's life, all the neighboring nations respected Solomon. They feared him. Not only did his people fear him, but the other nations feared him. And so you have a compliment of Pharaoh sending his daughter to marry Solomon. You have the other nations, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines and all. They're paying tribute. They're paying taxes. They are sending gifts to Solomon to appease what is at this point a powerful ruler. Now, with that said, I want to walk you through the cabinet of this leader. And I guess another way to put it would be the officers of his administration. So let's follow this. This is something I've never taught before, but it caught my eye and my heart, and I thought, well, let's go through this and see what we can take away from it. Now, I will confess this morning, I'm probably going to slaughter some of the pronunciations of the names, and if you can do better, you can stand up and give it to me, all right? Let's go with this. So here we go. The ministers. Here's what we read. 1 Kings chapter 4. And so King Solomon, verse 1, was king over all Israel. By the way, this will be the last time one king rules Israel. Solomon's son Rehoboam will end up ruling a divided kingdom. And so when we read in verse 1, all Israel is significant because after Solomon's reign, it will never again be one nation. Now, we'll keep, until the coming of Christ. Now, verse 2, and these were the princes, literally the officers, which Solomon had. Now, we'll begin with Azariah, the son of Zadok, or Zadok, as some would say, the priest. Now, so on your outline, let me fill it in first. He's the chaplain. He is the spiritual leader. I decided this past week I'm going to find out who the chaplain is for the presidency of the United States, and there isn't one. And I thought, well, that's appropriate given where we are right now. Now, the Senate has a chaplain, and apparently he's been there like decades. But the presidency of the United States doesn't have a chaplain. And so I decided to look back a little further and say, well, did Donald Trump have a chaplain? Well, he didn't have a chaplain, but he had a spiritual advisor. Does anybody know the name? Paula White. Do you know? Paula White. Paula White, 3 times divorced, married again, quote, pastoring in Apopka, I believe it is. Paula White, that was the spiritual advisor for Trump. And then I thought, well, that's appropriate too, given who the president is, right? Now, we're looking at an election year. We've got Donald Trump on one side, it looks like, unless he ends up in jail. And we've got Joe Biden on the other side, unless he ends up in jail. I believe the race for the presidency in 2024 is to see who's going to go to jail first. I think it is. I really think it is. So right now, the power is in the hands of the Biden administration, and they're trying desperately to put him away, right? On the other hand, you've got all of this stuff with Hunter Biden, and Hunter Biden is like the Absalom of the Biden administration, right? And so we are living in interesting times. And quite honestly, I think they're exciting times, don't you? I really do. You know, deplorable, but exciting. All right, let's keep going. All right, so we've looked at Azariah. He is the chaplain. Let's look at the scribes. The scribes. Here's, we read, and I'm going to try to get it right. Eliaphith and Ahiah, the sons of Shisha, scribes. And then I'm going to finish up the verse. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, the recorder. And so what are the scribes? They are the administrators. So they're like the king's assistants. So these are the men that are coordinating with the cabinet officers, if you would. So these are the 2 men. They are scribes. Now, I know in the New Testament, a scribe is a legal advisor. They were the experts in the law. But in this instance, as I did my research, they're really administrative assistants. And then we have the recorder, and he really is the historian. And so when we look at his name, Jehoshaphat, now there are other Jehoshaphat's, but this is the recorder. So he is the historian. Any of you ever been to the National Archives? You ever been there? Some of you have. It's a fascinating place to go. And so here in these United States, every day the White House is supposed to send all of their confidential correspondence to the National Archives, unless it goes to Hillary's server, which is in a bathroom located somewhere in Arlington, okay? Just saying, all right, just so that you know, all right. I know a little bit of history. All right, and so we have the historian here. He is the recorder. It is his responsibility to write down decisions that are made in the king's court. Now, I'm going to remind you about another king, Ahasuerus. Now, Ahasuerus is found in the book of Esther. Ahasuerus was king, and there was one night that he could not sleep. And you might remember that he summoned the recorder, the historian, to come and read to him the national record. And in the process of doing that, he realized he had overlooked rewarding someone. So my point is this. This was an important position because it kept track of decisions that had been made, judgments that had been passed by the king. Let me move on. And then we come to Benaiah. Of all of the men that are found in this portion of Scripture, I think he is the one that for me really sticks out in a wonderful way. And so we read this. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the host. Now, not a trick question, but a question. Does anyone remember who preceded Benaiah as the host or as the captain of the host of Israel? Anyone remember? No? Joab. Remember David's captain of the host. So Joab had been captain of the host all the way from the wilderness years, all the way through David's administration. He actually outlived David. But remember, Joab got into trouble. He defied the king on at least 3 different occasions. One, notably, was when the king said, "Don't harm my son Absalom." You might remember Joab took it upon himself to do what? To kill him. All right, so he and David were not in a good place the rest of David's life. And of course, when Solomon became king, the first thing he did was get rid of Joab, and he put Benaiah in place. So Benaiah is a man that really has a rich history. Let me give you a little bit about him because I think it's very important. By the way, with Benaiah, the captain or the commander over the host, what would be the equivalent in our nation today? Could be the Secretary of Defense, but perhaps more so the chairman of the chiefs of staff, I think it is, so over the Army, Navy, and all. So he would be the one today. Is that the one that wears a skirt? No, that's the assistant of transportation. Anyway, just thought I'd ask that question too, you know. All right, Benaiah. Benaiah may have worn a robe, but he did not wear a skirt. Let me tell you a little bit about him and why David chose him, because that is important. So let's read about Benaiah just for a moment, this commander of Solomon's armed forces. And so here we read concerning Benaiah, his bravery. Even during the reign of Solomon, he was a great warrior. So here we read in verse 22, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel. Now, that is the name of a village. I'm going to keep reading, but examine the verse and tell me what you can learn for it. Now, continuing to read, Benaiah, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down and slew a lion in a pit in a snowy day. Now, those are 2 courageous events in his life. But as we go back and we look at verse 22, what's the first thing you notice about Benaiah? Huh? He is the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man. So here is a lineage of men in this family line that are courageous, fighting men. There's a lot to be said about the influence that men can have on the lives of others, right? Whether it's as a father or as a leader. An inspiration. We as men should inspire. We should inspire a faithfulness. We should inspire a spiritual passion for the Lord. There should be so many different things in our life that others see. For Benaiah here, though, he has been loyal through the administration of David and now through the administration of Solomon, but his lineage is that of valiant men. So that's one thing. What's the second thing that you notice regarding Benaiah in verse 22? He slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. Now, I don't know what a lion-like man looks like, but it's probably someone you don't want to mess with, right? And there are artist renderings of that. Bottom line is that he was not only a man who was proven valiant and courageous himself, but he also had the deeds of war that proved him. He was a proven warrior. And then we have this interesting insight. Sometimes you read and you wonder, why in the world did the Lord even put that in His Word? And so here's what we read. He went down and he slew a lion in a pit in a snowy day. Now, I love the detail. And so what is significant about that? All right, lion in a pit. All right, we got that much. 2, he goes down into the pit. And then, but it's a snowy day, which means what? As a warrior, it would have been maybe difficult to have good footing, you know? And so there's so many things that God's Word provides us to let us know. This is not only a courageous man, a valiant man, but he is also a man of war. Even on a snowy day, he goes down into a pit and he slays the lion. Now, I don't know what the lion was doing in the pit, other than maybe it was a pit that had been dug and to capture the lion because the lion had been slaying the sheep. I don't know, but we'll move on. The Lord didn't give us all that. Now, verse 23, here's another act of valor. In verse 23, he slew an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits high, and that's roughly about 7.5 feet tall. And in the Egyptian's hand was a spear like a weaver's beam, and he went down to him with a staff. He plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. Give me that! Ugh. Dead man. All right. So, all right. Benaiah. If you were going to have a bodyguard, which is in effect what Benaiah was, this is the man, right? This is the man. Let me go on. Here's another, continue in verse 24 and 25. Those things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and the name among 3 mighty. So of the 3 mighty men, this is one of the 3. Behold, he was honorable among the 30, but attained not to the first 3. So he wasn't in that one group, but he was close to that group. But then we read, David set him over his guard. So the men over the secret service for Solomon was Benaiah. Now, moving on, enough time with that. Then we have 2 other guys, they're priests. Zadok, or Zadok, some would say, and Abiathar, and it says they were priests. I don't believe they were officers. I believe they were history. I'll tell you why. Abiathar, we know from 1 Kings chapter 2, the first thing that Solomon did was tell Abiathar to go. You're finished as the high priest. He had supported the insurrection. And as a result of that, Solomon said, I'm not going to kill you, but I am going to send you away. So even though he's mentioned here, he was still alive, he certainly wasn't in a position of authority. And then Zadok, at this point, was an elderly man. So he was an old man at this time. And so he's mentioned here, maybe just out of commendation, but it really doesn't appear that he had much of an office. Now, moving on. Executive chef. You got to have one of these in every castle, right? Executive chef and manager of the palace. And so I'm going to read, and Azariah, the son of Nathan, was over the officers. So here's a guy that's over the officers. And then the question should be, then what were the officers doing? And here we find it. 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 7. And Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, which provided victuals, or victuals, as you would want to say, for the king and his household. Each man his month in a year made provision. So 12 months in a year, 12 men who were responsible for making sure that there was food gathered from the countryside, as well as livestock, that would supply the king's table. And you would say, well, that doesn't seem like a very important job. Have you ever worked for a hungry king? Right? It is a very important job, and so tremendous amount of food. I've read that in Solomon's palace, he may have been feeding as much as 4,000 to 6,000 people a day in the palace complex itself. So it's mind-boggling. But I do wonder how many were feeding in Washington. Did you know that you can be an officer of the cabinet and you have your own shelf and all? Did you know that in Washington? Yeah. Those guys aren't out eating with the common folks. They actually have their own shelf. I learned that from visiting Washington. Anyway, moving on. Solomon had 12 officers then. A legal counselor. You always got to have a lawyer. And Solomon had his lawyer. Or if you are Donald Trump, you might have 100 lawyers. I don't know. But a legal counselor, principal officer, and the king's friend. I love that. Let me read that. Zabad, somebody would say, the son of Nathan, was principal officer and the king's friend. I wanted to read to you a little bit of the definition of that. By the principal officer, it means, and friend, it means confidant and advisor. And so this man is someone that David put great confidence in. In an administration with leadership, it's easy to surround yourself by people that will tell you what you want to hear. It's important, though, to have somebody that will tell you what you need to know. And so with this man here, you really find that he is the king's friend. By the way, legal counselor, what would be the equivalent in today's administration? Huh? Attorney General. Attorney General. And of course, we have a wonderful Attorney General. If his lips are moving, he's probably lying. I don't know if you know him. I'm just so happy he didn't make it to the Supreme Court. Do you remember? He was the last one that was projected by Obama to go onto the Supreme Court. And fortunately, the Republicans found some backbone and said, no, not you. And since then, the man's proven to really, what's his name? I'm trying to think of his name. Garland, right. He's the one that put homeschool moms and public parents who went before public school committees, what do you call it? School board meetings, right? And he put some of those mothers on terrorist watch lists. How many of you knew that? Some of you. That did happen in the last time. The American Education Association, AEA, I believe it is, they wrote a letter to Garland and said, you need to investigate these people for threats against the school teachers and the school boards. And he actually put them on terrorist lists. So and some of those parents actually woke up in the middle of the night with armed police busting their door down, coming into their house and terrorizing them. So I don't think this man was like that. All right, he had a lot of power and a lot of prestige, but this is in the beginning of Solomon's reign where he has a love for the Lord. Moving on, palace administrator, who's overseeing all that's going on in the household, and Ahishar was the man, the palace administrator. Let me see if I have an equivalent to that. No, I don't. I don't have one for that. And then I'll give you another one. Adoniram, there you go. I put him as the supervisor of laborers. We read that he was the son of Abda, was over the tribute. Now, the tribute would ultimately be workers that were employed by Solomon. Now, we don't know that there was a draft for the army, but you do know as you read the rest of chapter 4, there was a draft for laborers. And so sons across Israel were drafted, not enslaved, but they were drafted to work on the building projects of Solomon. And then there's the second level. Some lovingly would call this the swamp, and it's the administrators. These, fortunately, I don't believe are over the swamp. They were over the food, and we've already seen that. And beginning in verse 7 and going all the way through verse 19, you have all the names of the men who were responsible for supplying the king's household. I'm going to move on, not take time for that. All right, here's another. This is, I think, a wonderful insight that you get in the scriptures here, and that is the Commonwealth. Here in the United States, we have each year, it's supposed to be, I think, in January, right, that the president goes before Congress and he gives a speech, and it's called the State of the Union. Have we had that this year? We're going to have it? That ought to be a front seat opportunity there, shouldn't it? All right, the state of Israel during Solomon's reign. Let's look at the state of Israel during Solomon's reign. All right, first of all, we read in 1 Kings 4 and verse 20, Judah and Israel were many, as the sandwiches by the sea and the multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. So, in your words or in your thoughts, what was the state of the union of Israel in the early years of Solomon's reign? Huh? A growing population, right? And so I would suggest to you that there was that sense of fulfilling the biblical command, be fruitful and multiply, and so it was. It's interesting in American history when Americans as a nation feel prosperous, there is a growth in population. Families have children. Anyone know what the current ratio of the birth rate is in the United States right now? It's about 1.7. So a man and a woman get married, and the ratio of children born to American households generally is less than 2 children. So by each generation, the general population of American citizens is fast declining. It's declining. Over in Europe, in some of the Western European countries, the population has dropped as much as 1.2. So that's why you have this massive illegal immigration flowing into Western Europe, sadly, in our southern border now, is because the general population is failing. It's dying. And as a result of that, labor, I'm going to say cheap labor, but I don't think that's accurate anymore, but labor is failing as well. And across America right now, I don't know if you have contacts like I do in places, but there are whole segments of communities where no one's working, no one is doing contracting and plumbing and electricity. Those skills are hard to find if you can find them at all. And so as a result of that, immigrants, probably many of them illegal, are taking on the task of the drywall and the construction and all these things that have to be done if you're going to build. And in no way am I supporting illegal immigration. I'm just stating the fact. So as Americans, when we as a population are uncertain of the future, financially, economically and all uncertain, there is the failing birth rate as a result of that. The second thing you notice up here, not only is there a growing population, but we also notice that there was a prosperous population as well. They were eating and drinking and making merry. And so during the reign of Solomon, it might be said that you could be singing, "Happy days are here again," right? And it would never be this happy again. In fact, before his life is over, that happiness would be gone, and the nation would be divided after his death. But at this point in Solomon's reign, there is a man who is reigning who loves the Lord with all of his heart. And as a result of that, from the top down, there is a prosperity, there is a hope, there is a joy. You can always follow a national sentiment based on who the leadership is. I've lived long enough. I make an application. The Ronald Reagan. I remember Lyndon Johnson, and I remember that I'm not a liar, or I'm not a thief, or whatever it was, Nixon. And then we have the little era of Gerald Ford, and then we have that illustrious peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter. And then we go into the Ronald Reagan era, go from the Ronald Reagan era into the Bush era, go from that era into the Clinton era, go from that era into the Bush era again, and then into the Obama era, and into the Trump era, and now we're in the Biden era. Okay, now over the course of what I've just named, and most of you many of you, have lived through those administrations. As a nation, when would you say there was a sentiment of happiness and patriotic pride? All right, the Reagan era, the great communicator. I think he had a huge part in the wall being torn down in Germany between the East Berlin and West Berlin. Mr. Gorbachev tear this wall down. It didn't happen in his administration, but it happened soon after, I think, 1990, 1991. And so there was a sense of prosperity. The peanut farmer, the runaway inflation, people were borrowing money to buy a home at 17%, right? For an automobile, it was 14% interest. And so Reagan comes along and everything changes. My point is this: from the top down, you can have a leader who inspires. And with that inspiration, he gives hope. And a nation rises with him. Donald Trump. I'm amazed at him. And again, there's so many things about him that are negative qualities about his personality and character. But generally speaking, you look at his administration, and there was a sense of optimism and patriotism. Am I right? USA, USA shouted. You have stadiums filled with thousands and thousands of people. Why? Because of an inspiring leader. And then we have the one who is president now. Is he an inspiration? Absolutely not. He's feeble, fickle, foolish, weak. During the Trump era, there was a strength and a power. We are the world's leader. Like it or not, we are the world's leader. And as goes the United States, so right now goes the world. So during the Trump era, there was a fear of what that man might do, maybe for all of us. What is he going to do? What is he going to say? I don't know what he's going to say, you know. But with Biden projects weakness. And we are paying the consequences of that. I just pray that it won't be so bad. Coming out of the Clinton era, it was at the beginning almost of the Bush administration that the World Trade Center was attacked, right? Fortunately, Bush stepped forward and he brought leadership, and many of us can remember him standing on the ruins of the World Trade Center with a megaphone in his hand, challenging and encouraging the people. He inspired America. And then Obama came. So, you know, when we vote in the fall, we should vote for leaders that inspire and that have the aspiration of we should put our national security and sovereignty above everything else. And then let the world be the benefactors of it. Anyway, enough of that. Another thought, the country itself. Let's see what we can learn from Solomon again and Israel. And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and they served Solomon all the days of his life. So all the other nations around Israel were indebted to Solomon. They were sending horses and chariots and supplies and workers to Israel because it was a premier nation under an inspiring leader. The country. Thirdly, the court. And I'm not going to go through this here because of my time, but here are the provisions that were necessary in the king's court for one day. And I find it fascinating to read, but I'm not going to take time with that. And then the last one, the condition of the nation. And this is important. Again, it goes back to the type of leader that Solomon was. And here's what we read. That first of all, it was a season of peace. We read of Israel and Solomon particularly. He had dominion. And then we read in the second half of that over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on all sides round about him. Verse 25, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely. Are those not the characteristics of what you would want our nation to be? Right? A sense of dominion or power or presence, peace and safety. The job of the President of the United States should be to primarily provide peace and safety, security for us as a nation. For when that happens, there is prosperity. 1 Kings 4:25. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, and every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So look at that statement. Every man. So there's national prosperity, and there is individual prosperity. And this all begins with a king whose dominion provided peace and safety. As a result of that, every man of Israel, every household of Israel had his own vine and he had his own fig tree. Now, we say, well, we're living in a culture that is in a transition, and they're trying everything in their power to remove private ownership of land, of houses, and of vehicles. Do you understand that? When a nation is prosperous, every man has his own vine and his own fig tree. He has his own property. He is the Lord of his own household. But when you don't have a good king, a good leader, you end up, we the people, serving the government instead of the government serving we the people. When we the people are prosperous, every last one of us should have our own fig tree and we should have our own vine. But our children are growing up in a culture that is telling them, you will not have your own house. You're going to live in an apartment complex in a, what is it called, a 15-minute city or something like that? Right. You will not have your own car. In fact, we're going to transition you to electric vehicles, and then when we want to shut the grid off or shut your car off, then we'll do it. So what we're watching is a culture today that is stealing, robbing individual liberty. And with that is the aspiration of hope and joy. And by the way, your own vine and your own fig tree. I don't know about you, but I love reading this because I learn a lot. And I hope you do too. So many other things. I'm going to fill it in. The construction, I don't have time to study it. So I'm going to go to the last one. The temple is built during this time. Also, the palace, Solomon's palace. He enforces Jerusalem's wall. He fortifies. He gives security to the capital city. He begins building storehouses for grain across to make sure that the people are cared for and provided for. And he begins building, fortifying cities. Why? Because it was important to guard the borders of Israel. And with that, you should get quite upset with today's administration.